I sat in the sterile law office watching my father Richard hold hands with his 25-year-old mistress Brittany, while my heartbroken mother Carol trembled beside me. The lawyer prepared to read Grandma Eleanor's will. Dad whispered something to Brittany, who giggled softly, both expecting to inherit the family estate worth $3 million. Mom hadn't spoken since the funeral yesterday. I felt rage building as I watched Dad's smug expression, knowing he abandoned our family 6 months ago for this woman believing Grandma would still leave him everything as the only son. Mr. Peterson adjusted his wire-rimmed glasses and cleared his throat, his deep voice echoing through the mahogany-paneled office. The leather chairs creaked as we all leaned forward, but none more confidently than my father. Richard's manicured fingers intertwined with Brittany's freshly painted pink nails, and I watched his chest puff with anticipation. He'd been counting on this inheritance for months, already making plans with his new girlfriend about their luxurious future together. I shall now read the last will and testament of Eleanor Margaret Thompson, dated March 15th of this year. Mr. Peterson announced formally. My grandmother had always been thorough, but something in the lawyer's tone suggested this reading would be unlike anything we expected. Brittany shifted in her designer dress, the same black number she'd worn to seduce my father at his office Christmas party. She whispered something about finally getting what we deserve, and Richard squeezed her hand reassuringly. Mom sat rigid beside me, her wedding ring still catching the afternoon light streaming through the tall windows. Your grandmother left detailed explanations for each decision. Mr. Peterson continued opening the thick document. She wanted everyone present to understand her reasoning completely. Dad's eyebrows lifted slightly, but his confident smirk remained unchanged. He'd always been Grandma's favorite, or so he believed. As her only child, he'd assumed his recent life choices wouldn't affect her final wishes. To my son, Richard, the lawyer read in Grandma's voice, I have watched you make decisions that have broken my heart and shattered the family I worked so hard to build. The temperature in the room seemed to drop 10 degrees. Brittany's grip tightened on Dad's hand, and I noticed her perfectly applied lipstick had left a small stain on her coffee cup. Mom's breathing became shallow, and I reached over to steady her trembling hands. I know about the young woman who destroyed my son's marriage. Mr. Peterson continued reading Grandma's words. I know about the lies, the manipulation, and the cruelty you have shown to Carol, who loved you faithfully for 28 years. Brittany's face flushed crimson, and she released Dad's hand as if it had caught fire. Richard's jaw clenched, and for the first time since entering the office, his arrogant expression wavered. Mom let out a small gasp, realizing Grandma had known everything. Therefore, the lawyer's voice grew stronger. I leave my home at 12 Maple Street, along with all furnishings, artwork, and personal belongings to my beloved daughter-in-law, Carol Thompson, who has shown grace and dignity in the face of unimaginable betrayal. The words hit the room like a thunderclap. Mom's hand flew to her mouth and tears began streaming down her cheeks. Richard shot to his feet, his face contorting with disbelief and growing rage. That's impossible, he snarled, his polished facade cracking completely. She can't leave my childhood home to someone who isn't even blood family. Mr. Peterson raised his hand calmly. There's more, Richard. Please sit down. I also leave to Carol my investment portfolio with Hartman Financial currently valued at $1.7 million, as well as my 51% ownership in Thompson Family Hardware, ensuring she will never want for anything again. Mom collapsed back in her chair, overwhelmed by the magnitude of Grandma's protection. I felt my own eyes fill with tears as I realized the brilliant strategy behind every word. Grandma hadn't just left Mom money. She'd given her complete financial independence and control over Dad's livelihood. Brittany stared at Richard with growing horror, watching her dreams of luxury evaporate before her perfectly made-up eyes. The woman who'd been so confident about her future with a wealthy older man suddenly found herself tied to someone who was about to lose everything. And to my son Richard. Mr. Peterson continued with what I swear was the hint of a smile. I leave the bedroom furniture from your childhood room, including the race car bed you refused to give up until age 16, and your complete collection of baseball cards, which should remind you of simpler times when you still had honor. The silence that followed was deafening. Dad's face had gone from confident to confused to panicked, and now settled into a sickly green color that matched his tie. Brittany's mouth hung open in shock, her carefully crafted composure completely shattered. These items, Grandma's will continued through the lawyer's voice, match the maturity level you have shown in recent months. Perhaps they will help you remember who you used to be before greed and selfishness consumed your heart. I watched my father realize that his mother had deliberately humiliated him in the most public way possible, leaving him with children's furniture as his inheritance from a $3 million estate. The woman he'd betrayed our family for now stared at him like he was a stranger, her investment in their relationship crumbling with each passing second. Mr. Peterson wasn't finished reading, though every person in that oak-paneled room looked shell-shocked by Grandma's opening salvo. Richard slumped in his chair, running his hands through his graying hair, while Brittany sat frozen, her designer purse clutched against her chest like armor. Your grandmother also left specific instructions regarding financial irregularities she discovered. The lawyer continued pulling out a separate folder. Mrs. Thompson had been conducting a private investigation for several months before her passing. Mom looked at me with confusion, neither of us understanding what Grandma could have uncovered. Richard's head snapped up, and I saw genuine fear flicker across his features for the first time. Eleanor discovered that Richard had been systematically withdrawing money from Carol's personal savings account without her knowledge or consent. Mr. Peterson read from a detailed report. Bank records show unauthorized transfers totaling $43,700 over the past 8 months. The revelation hit Mom like a physical blow. She'd been wondering why her account balance seemed lower than expected, but Richard had convinced her she was being forgetful about her spending. The gaslighting had been so subtle, so persistent, that she'd actually started doubting her own memory. Furthermore, the lawyer continued, security footage from Thompson Family Hardware shows Richard removing cash deposits from the store safe, on multiple occasions money that was never reported to the business accountant or deposited in company accounts. Brittany turned to stare at Richard with dawning comprehension. The expensive dinners, the weekend trips to luxury hotels, the diamond earrings he'd bought her for Valentine's Day, all of it had been purchased with stolen money. Her face contorted with disgust as she realized she'd been an unwitting accomplice in his theft. I have copies of bank statements, security footage, and documented evidence of every transaction, Mr. Peterson announced, sliding a thick envelope across the polished conference table. Eleanor spent considerable time ensuring this evidence would hold up in court if necessary. Richard's hands shook as he reached for the envelope, his face growing paler with each page he turned. The evidence was overwhelming. Timestamps, account numbers, even photographs of him pocketing cash from the business register when he thought no one was watching. But perhaps most disturbing, the lawyer's voice grew cold, were the statements Richard made to Eleanor about his wife's mental state and character. He told his dying mother that Carol was mentally unstable, financially irresponsible, and that the marriage had failed because of her inadequacies. Mom's sharp intake of breath echoed through the silent room. Learning that her husband had not only betrayed her with another woman, but had also assassinated her character to his own mother, felt like a knife twisting in her chest. She'd spent months blaming herself for not being enough, not trying hard enough, not loving him properly. Brittany's perfectly manicured nails dug into her palms as another piece of the puzzle fell into place. Richard had told her that his wife was emotionally unstable, that Carol had driven him away with her constant complaints and neediness. He'd painted himself as the victim of a difficult marriage deserving of happiness with a younger, more understanding woman. Eleanor wanted everyone to know. Mr. Peterson continued that she investigated these claims thoroughly and found them to be complete fabrications designed to justify Richard's selfish behavior. The envelope contained more than financial records. Grandma had compiled testimonials from friends, neighbors, and family members about Mom's character. Teachers from the school where she volunteered praised her kindness and reliability. Church members described her generosity and gentle spirit. Even Richard's own business partners spoke highly of her intelligence and integrity. Your grandmother also discovered, the lawyer said, pulling out another document, that Richard promised his mistress they would purchase a luxury condominium at Harbor View Estates using his inheritance money. The down payment has already been placed in escrow. Brittany's face flamed with embarrassment. She'd been so excited about their future home, bragging to her friends about the waterfront property and marble bathrooms. Now everyone would know that her wealthy boyfriend was actually a thief with no inheritance and mounting debts. Finally, Mr. Peterson announced Eleanor arranged for certain business transactions to be expedited upon her death. Richard's business partner, Harold Stevens, has exercised his right of first refusal to purchase Richard's 49% share of Thompson Family Hardware at 50% below current market value. The final blow landed with devastating precision. Dad had been counting on selling his share of the hardware store to fund his new life with Brittany. Instead, he'd be forced to accept a fraction of its worth, barely enough to cover the money he'd stolen and the debts he'd accumulated. Harold was quite concerned about the financial irregularities, the lawyer added with professional detachment. He felt it was best for the business to change ownership structure immediately. Richard buried his face in his hands, finally understanding the full scope of his mother's strategy. She hadn't just disinherited him. She'd systematically dismantled every aspect of his future plans while protecting the innocent people he'd wounded. The woman he'd always considered a simple elderly widow had outmaneuvered him at every turn. Brittany stood abruptly, her chair scraping against the hardwood floor. "I can't do this," she whispered, grabbing her purse and moving toward the door. "I can't be part of this mess." But Mr. Peterson held up his hand once more. "I'm afraid there's still more to discuss." Eleanor left sealed envelopes for each person present containing information she felt you needed to know. The lawyer distributed 4 cream-colored envelopes, each written in Grandma's distinctive handwriting. The sight of her familiar script brought fresh tears to Mom's eyes while Richard stared at his envelope like it might explode. Inside mine was a letter that began, "My dearest Jade, by the time you read this, you will have seen how far some people will fall when they choose greed over love. But you will also see how strong you and your mother truly are." Brittany ripped open her envelope with trembling fingers, her face growing paler with each word she read. Whatever Grandma had written was clearly devastating because the young woman who'd entered the office so confidently now looked like she might faint. "What does it say?" Richard demanded, reaching for the letter, but Brittany jerked it away from him. "She knew." Brittany whispered, her voice barely audible. "She knew about Marcus." The name hung in the air like a confession. Richard's eyes widened with shock and growing comprehension, while Mom looked between them with confusion. I felt my stomach clench as I realized there were even more layers to this betrayal than any of us had imagined. "Who is Marcus?" Mom asked quietly, though I suspected she dreaded the answer. Brittany's carefully applied makeup was starting to streak with tears of humiliation and panic. "My personal trainer," she admitted, unable to meet anyone's eyes. "I didn't mean for anything to happen, but Richard was always working late, and Marcus understood me in ways that... You've been cheating on me." Richard's voice cracked with disbelief. "While I destroyed my marriage for you, you were sleeping with someone else." The irony wasn't lost on anyone in the room. The man who'd betrayed his wife of 28 years was outraged by his mistress's infidelity, but Brittany wasn't finished confessing. "Eleanor's letter says she had private investigators watching both of us." Brittany continued, her voice shaking. "She has photographs, hotel receipts, everything. Marcus and I have been together for 3 months." Mom opened her own envelope with steady hands, though I could see the effort it took to maintain her composure. Her face cycled through several emotions as she read. Surprise, sadness, but gradually something that looked like relief and even strength. "Richard," Mom said, her voice stronger than I'd heard it in months. "Your mother knew about your gambling debts. She knew about the $60,000 you owe to Danny Morrison and his associates. She knew you were planning to use the inheritance money to pay them off." My father's face went ashen. Danny Morrison ran several questionable businesses around town, and owing him money was dangerous. Richard had been hiding the extent of his gambling problem from everyone, including Brittany. "She also knew," Mom continued reading, "that you've been stealing from the hardware store for months to make minimum payments to Danny. Harold Stevens has been documenting everything at Eleanor's request." The web of deception was unraveling faster than Richard could process. He'd been so careful to hide his problems, so confident that he could solve everything with Grandma's money. Now he realized that his dying mother had been 10 steps ahead of him the entire time. Mr. Peterson cleared his throat and pulled out his laptop computer. "Eleanor also left video messages for each of you. Would you like me to play them now?" Without waiting for an answer, he opened the first file. Grandma's familiar face filled the screen, looking tired but determined. She was sitting in her favorite chair by the living room window, the same spot where she'd told me countless stories during my childhood. "Richard, my dear son." Grandma's recorded voice began, and I felt tears spring to my eyes hearing her speak again. "I am dying, and I have spent my final months watching you destroy everything good in your life. I cannot save you from your choices, but I can protect Carol and Jade from the consequences." Dad stared at the screen with growing horror, seeing his mother's disappointment etched clearly on her face. This wasn't the gentle, forgiving woman who'd always cleaned up his messes and made excuses for his behavior. This was a woman who'd finally seen him clearly. "I know about your gambling, your theft, your lies, and your cruelty to the woman who loved you faithfully. I know about the money you've stolen and the debts you've hidden. Most painfully, I know how you've tried to make Carol believe she's worthless so you could feel justified in abandoning her." Brittany was openly crying now, mascara streaking down her cheeks in dark rivers. The sophisticated woman she'd pretended to be had completely dissolved, leaving behind someone who looked very young and very scared. "Brittany." Grandma's voice continued. "I know about your relationship with Marcus Rodriguez. I know about the pregnancy test you took last week, and I know that you've been using my son while planning your exit strategy with another man." The room fell completely silent. Even Mr. Peterson looked shocked by this revelation. Brittany's hand instinctively moved to her stomach, and I saw Richard's eyes follow the gesture with dawning understanding. "The baby you're carrying," Grandma's voice said gently but firmly, "was conceived during your relationship with Marcus, not Richard. The timeline is clear, and I have the medical records to prove it." Brittany collapsed back into her chair, all pretense finally abandoned. Richard stared at her with a mixture of betrayal and relief, while Mom and I sat stunned by the complexity of Grandma's investigation. "I arranged for DNA testing to be available immediately," Grandma continued from the screen. "The results are in the sealed envelope Mr. Peterson has for you, Brittany. I thought you should know the truth before making any more decisions about your future." Mr. Peterson handed Brittany another envelope with shaking hands. Inside were medical documents confirming what Grandma had discovered. The pregnancy timeline made it impossible for Richard to be the father. "I loved you, Richard," Grandma's recorded message concluded, "but I loved Carol and Jade more than I could tolerate watching you destroy them. I hope someday you'll understand that protecting them was the last gift I could give you all." As the video ended, the office door burst open, and a young man with dark hair and athletic build strode in looking panicked and angry. Marcus had apparently received his own urgent message. "Brittany, what's going on?" He demanded, his eyes sweeping the room and taking in her tear-streaked face and defeated posture. "Your text said there was an emergency about the baby." Richard stood slowly, his face a mask of barely controlled rage and humiliation. Everything he'd sacrificed his family for had been an elaborate lie. The woman he'd chosen over his wife had been using him just as callously as he'd been using her. "Is it true?" Richard asked quietly, his voice deadly calm. "Is the baby his—" Brittany looked between the two men, both staring at her with expectation and accusation. In that moment, faced with the complete collapse of all her schemes, she made the only choice that made sense to her. "Yes," she whispered, reaching for Marcus's hand. "I'm sorry, Richard. I never meant for it to go this far." Marcus pulled Brittany against him protectively, glaring at Richard with obvious hostility. "She's been trying to figure out how to tell you for weeks. This inheritance thing just forced everything into the open." Richard laughed, a bitter sound that held no humor. "There is no inheritance. There's nothing left for any of us to fight over." And with that admission, the last of Brittany's interest in him disappeared completely. She'd bet everything on a man she thought was wealthy and stable, only to discover he was actually a thief and a gambling addict with dangerous debts. "Come on, Marcus," she said, gathering her purse and coat. "Let's get out of here." As they moved toward the door, Marcus turned back with a sneer. "Maybe next time you'll think twice before stealing another man's wife, old man." The door slammed behind them, leaving Richard alone with the family he'd destroyed and the devastating realization that he'd lost everything for absolutely nothing. The silence following Brittany and Marcus's departure felt thick and suffocating. Richard remained standing, staring at the closed door, as if he could will them back just to have someone else to blame for his situation. Mom sat quietly processing everything she'd learned, while I felt a strange mixture of vindication and sadness watching my father's world implode. Mr. Peterson broke the silence by pulling out another folder, this one marked with red tape. Eleanor left instructions that these final documents should only be shared after the previous revelations were made clear. Richard turned back to the table, his movements slow and defeated. The confident man who'd entered the office holding his mistress's hand had been replaced by someone who looked aged and broken. "DNA test results." The lawyer announced, sliding papers across the table. Eleanor arranged for testing using hair samples from Richard's bathroom and medical records from Brittany's doctor visits. "The child she's carrying shares no genetic markers with your family line." The scientific confirmation of what we'd already heard seemed to hit Richard like a physical blow. He'd been played completely manipulated by a woman who saw him as nothing more than a stepping stone to a better life. "There's more," Mr. Peterson continued. "Eleanor discovered that Marcus Rodriguez has been planning to open his own fitness center. Brittany has been using her relationship with you, Richard, to gather information about potential business loans and investment opportunities." Mom leaned forward, her journalist instincts finally awakening after months of emotional numbness. "What kind of information?" "Client lists from the hardware store, financial records, credit information," the lawyer explained. Brittany was photographing documents from Richard's home office and sharing them with Marcus. They were planning to use Richard's business connections and credit score to secure funding for their venture. I felt sick, realizing how thoroughly my father had been used. While he thought he was having a romantic affair, Brittany had been conducting industrial espionage. Every intimate moment had been calculated, every expression of love designed to extract something valuable. The private investigators Eleanor hired documented everything, Mr. Peterson said, producing a thick portfolio of photographs and recordings. Restaurant meetings where they discussed using Richard's resources, hotel rooms, where they planned their business strategy, even recorded conversations about timing their exit once the fitness center opened. Richard sank into his chair, the portfolio falling from his nerveless fingers. Photos spilled across the table showing Brittany and Marcus embracing, laughing, clearly in love in a way she'd never been with him. In one picture, they were toasting champagne, while Marcus held up architectural plans for their proposed gym. "Your mother wanted you to understand," Mr. Peterson said gently, "that Brittany never loved you. She was completing a business transaction. The cruelty of it was breathtaking. Richard had destroyed his marriage, stolen money, lied to his family, and ruined his relationship with his dying mother, all for a woman who'd been laughing about his gullibility behind his back. But Grandma wasn't finished with her revelations. Eleanor also investigated your gambling debts more thoroughly than you realized, the lawyer continued. She discovered that Danny Morrison has been charging you interest rates that violate federal lending laws. Your debt is legally unenforceable. Richard's head shot up, hope flickering in his eyes for the first time since the reading began. Furthermore, Mr. Peterson smiled slightly. Eleanor reported Morrison's illegal lending practices to federal authorities. He's currently under investigation and in no position to collect from anyone. I watched my father process this information, realizing that his mother had eliminated the threat he'd been most afraid of. Even while punishing him for his choices, she'd still protected him from genuine danger. However, the lawyer's expression grew serious again. The embezzlement charges are very real. Harold Stevens has filed a formal complaint with the district attorney's office. Eleanor's evidence package ensures there will be consequences for your theft. Mom spoke for the first time in several minutes, her voice steady and clear. What kind of consequences? Restitution, community service, probation at minimum, Mr. Peterson explained. Eleanor hoped that facing legal accountability might help Richard understand the real cost of his choices. I realized that even Grandma's harshest decisions came from love. She wasn't just punishing my father, she was trying to force him to confront his behavior and change before it was too late. There's one more surprise, the lawyer said, pulling out a final envelope addressed to Mom in Grandma's handwriting. Eleanor made some additional arrangements for Carol's future. Mom opened the letter with trembling hands, and I watched her face transform as she read. Tears spilled down her cheeks, but for the first time today, they looked like tears of joy rather than pain. She bought me a house, Mom whispered in amazement, a beautiful colonial on Elm Street completely paid for. And she enrolled me in the graduate program at State University, full tuition paid for my master's degree in education. The revelation hit me like a thunderbolt. Grandma hadn't just given Mom financial security, she'd given her a completely fresh start. The house on Elm Street was in the nicest part of town, and the education degree would allow Mom to pursue the teaching career she'd always dreamed of before marriage and motherhood took precedence. Eleanor spent considerable time planning your transition to independence, Mr. Peterson told Mom. She wanted to ensure you had not just money, but purpose and a new beginning. I felt tears streaming down my own face as I realized the depth of Grandma's love and planning. While Dad had been focused on his selfish desires, his dying mother had been orchestrating a complete rescue for the family members who deserved better. And for you, Jade, the lawyer said, turning to me with a warm smile, Eleanor established a full scholarship fund for law school. She believed you had inherited her sense of justice and strategic thinking. The room spun around me as I processed this incredible gift. Law school had always been a distant dream, something I couldn't afford and didn't dare hope for. But Grandma had seen something in me that I hadn't even recognized in myself. She left you a personal message, Mr. Peterson said, handing me a sealed letter written in Grandma's familiar script. My dearest Jade. I read aloud, my voice shaking with emotion. You have always been my pride and joy, but today you will see qualities in yourself that you never knew existed. Watch your mother find her strength and know that the same courage lives in your heart. Use your education to protect families like ours. Make sure justice prevails not just in courtrooms, but in the choices we make every day. Richard sat in stunned silence, finally understanding that his mother's final act hadn't been revenge. It had been rescue. She'd seen his family falling apart and had used her last months on Earth to ensure the innocent people would not just survive, but thrive. Your grandmother left one final message for you. Richard, Mr. Peterson said quietly, but she requested it be delivered privately. Would you prefer I read it now or arrange a separate meeting? Dad looked around the room at his wife and daughter, both crying tears of gratitude for a woman's love and foresight, then back at the lawyer who delivered his complete humiliation with professional courtesy. "Now," he said simply, "I think we've all heard enough truth for one day. Whatever she wanted to say to me, they deserve to hear it too." Mr. Peterson nodded respectfully and opened the final envelope marked with Richard's name in Eleanor's distinctive handwriting. The lawyer cleared his throat and began reading in a gentle voice that somehow made Grandma feel present in the room again. "My beloved son, if you are hearing this letter, then you have learned the full extent of your choices and their consequences. I want you to know that every decision I made was born from love. Love for you, for Carol, and for Jade." Richard's hands clenched and unclenched in his lap as he listened to his mother's words from beyond the grave. "I spent the last year of my life watching you destroy everything good about yourself, and it broke my heart more than the cancer ever could. But I also spent that time planning how to save the parts of our family that could still be salvaged." Mom reached over and took my hand, both of us emotional hearing Grandma's voice through the lawyer's careful reading. "I hired investigators not to spy on you, Richard, but to gather evidence that could protect Carol legally and financially. I knew you were stealing from her accounts, and I knew she would never press charges herself because she still loved you." The truth of that statement hit hard. Mom had been so conditioned to protect Dad that she would have let him destroy her financially rather than send him to prison. "I discovered your gambling debts 3 months before I died. I watched you spiral deeper into desperation, lying to everyone about the danger you were in. So I did what any mother would do. I eliminated the threat while teaching you that actions have consequences." Mr. Peterson paused in his reading to pull out another document. Eleanor's investigators gathered enough evidence of Morrison's illegal lending practices to shut down his entire operation. She essentially saved Richard's life while forcing him to confront his problems. I felt a chill of realization. Dad hadn't just been facing financial ruin, he'd been in physical danger. Grandma had quietly solved his most serious problem while making sure he couldn't ignore the smaller ones. But it was discovering Brittany's true nature that finally convinced me drastic action was necessary. The letter continued. "Richard, she was never who you thought she was. The private investigators documented her relationship with Marcus from the beginning. She targeted you specifically because of your financial situation and family connections." Richard's face crumpled as he absorbed the full extent of his manipulation. Every romantic gesture, every declaration of love, every intimate moment had been part of an elaborate con game. "She researched you for weeks before that Christmas party, Richard. She knew about the hardware store, the family money, even your gambling habits. Marcus needed investors for his business venture, and Brittany volunteered to find them by any means necessary." The coldness of it was staggering. While Richard thought he was falling in love with a younger woman, she'd been executing a business plan that required destroying his marriage and stealing his resources. "I watched her photograph documents in your home office. I recorded her phone calls to Marcus discussing timeline strategies and exit plans. I even have video of her practicing emotional manipulation techniques that Marcus taught her." Mom gasped audibly. The level of premeditation was chilling. Brittany hadn't just been unfaithful, she'd been conducting a sophisticated fraud operation. The pregnancy was intended to be her insurance policy, Grandma's letter revealed. If the business plan failed, she could use paternity claims to secure long-term financial support. But she got careless with the timeline, and Marcus's baby complicated everything. Mr. Peterson looked up from the letter. Eleanor's investigators documented Brittany's purchase of multiple pregnancy tests and her research into paternity fraud. She was preparing to deceive Richard about the baby's parentage if necessary. I felt nauseated thinking about how close Dad had come to supporting another man's child while being systematically robbed by its mother. Grandma's intervention had saved him from years of additional exploitation. Richard. The letter continued. I know you hate me right now for exposing these truths so publicly, but I also know that private conversations would never have broken through your denial and arrogance. Sometimes love requires harsh medicine. Dad's shoulders shook with suppressed emotion as he listened to his mother's final words. I have given Carol and Jade everything they need to build new lives without you, but I have also eliminated your immediate dangers and given you a chance to rebuild yourself if you choose to take it. Mr. Peterson paused and smiled slightly. There's one more surprise, Richard. Your mother established a small trust fund that will provide basic living expenses for 2 years, contingent on you completing addiction counseling and community service requirements. Richard looked up sharply, hope and confusion warring on his face. Eleanor believed in redemption, the lawyer explained. She wanted to ensure you had the opportunity to become the man she raised you to be, but only if you were willing to do the work. The conditions were strict but fair. Gambling addiction treatment, restitution for stolen money, community service hours, and regular counseling sessions. If Richard completed the program successfully, he'd receive enough money to start over modestly. She also left you this, Mr. Peterson said, producing a small wrapped package. Inside was a photograph of Richard as a young boy sitting on Grandma's lap while she read him a bedtime story. On the back she'd written, "This is the son I remember and the man I pray you can become again." Dad stared at the photograph for a long moment, then suddenly broke down completely. All the arrogance and denial crumbled away as he sobbed for everything he'd lost and thrown away. "I'm sorry," he whispered, looking at Mom and me through his tears. "I'm so sorry for all of it. I don't know how I became this person." Mom studied him carefully, her journalist's instincts evaluating whether his emotion was genuine or just another manipulation. After several minutes, she spoke quietly. "Your mother gave you a chance to change Richard, but the choice is yours. Jade and I are going to be fine without you, but we're not going to stop you from trying to redeem yourself." It was more grace than he deserved, and I think we all knew it. But Grandma's letter had reminded us that love sometimes means offering hope, even when trust has been shattered. There's one final element to Eleanor's plan. Mr. Peterson said, producing a business card. She arranged for Carol to meet with someone who has been waiting 25 years for this conversation. Mom took the card with shaking hands. It was simple white cardstock with elegant black lettering. Dr. David Hernandez, Veterinary Medicine, followed by a phone number and address. David Hernandez was Eleanor's choice for you, Carol, long before you married Richard, the lawyer explained gently. He's been widowed for 3 years and has never stopped wondering what might have been. I watched Mom's face cycle through shock confusion and something that looked like awakening possibility. David had been her college sweetheart, the quiet pre-veterinary student she'd loved desperately, until Richard's charismatic pursuit convinced her to choose differently. Eleanor researched his life carefully, Mr. Peterson continued. He built a successful practice, raised 2 wonderful children with his late wife, and has remained the kind, gentle man you remember. She took the liberty of sharing your new contact information with him. As if summoned by the mention of his name, Mom's phone chimed with a text message. Her hands trembled as she read it aloud. "Carol, this is David Hernandez. Eleanor gave me your number and told me you might be ready for a new chapter. I know this is overwhelming timing, but I would love to take you to dinner and catch up on 25 years of life. If you're interested, I'll be at Milano's restaurant tomorrow at 7 o'clock, hoping you'll join me." The message was perfect. Respectful, patient, and giving Mom complete control over whether to respond. Grandma had orchestrated even this final detail with exquisite care. "Your mother spent her last months ensuring that everyone she loved had a path forward," Mr. Peterson concluded. "The question now is what each of you will choose to do with the opportunities she provided." The following evening, I sat with Mom in her new house on Elm Street, watching her get ready for dinner with David. The Colonial was everything Grandma had promised. Spacious rooms filled with natural light, a modern kitchen, and a peaceful garden visible through French doors. It felt like hope made manifest in brick and mortar. "I can't believe I'm this nervous," Mom said, adjusting her necklace for the fourth time. She'd chosen a simple navy dress that brought out her eyes, and for the first time in months, she looked like herself again. "It's been 25 years, I reminded her gently. "Some nervousness is normal." She smiled, and I realized it was the first genuine smile I'd seen from her since before Dad's affair came to light. "Your grandmother always said David was the one who got away. I used to think she was just being romantic, but maybe she saw something I was too young to understand." A knock at the front door interrupted our conversation. Through the window, I saw a silver-haired man in a well-tailored suit, holding a bouquet of white roses. Mom's favorite flowers, though I wondered how he'd remembered that detail after so many years. "That's him," Mom whispered suddenly, frozen with anxiety. I squeezed her hand encouragingly. "Grandma chose him for you, remember, trust her judgment." Mom opened the door to reveal David Hernandez, older, but still possessing the gentle eyes and kind smile she'd fallen in love with in college. The years had been kind to him. He looked distinguished and successful, but more importantly, he looked at Mom like she was still the most beautiful woman in the world. "Carol," he said softly, offering her the roses, "you look exactly the same as you did at 20. It was clearly a lie. We all looked older. But it was the kind of sweet lie that made a woman feel cherished rather than deceived. Mom accepted the flowers with a blush that knocked years off her appearance. "David, this is my daughter, Jade," Mom said, regaining her composure. "Jade, this is Dr. Hernandez." "Please call me David," he said, shaking my hand warmly. "Your grandmother told me so much about you. Law school is quite an achievement." The fact that he'd taken time to learn about me spoke well of his character. This wasn't just about reclaiming an old romance. He was genuinely interested in Mom's entire life. "Shall we go?" David offered Mom his arm like an old-fashioned gentleman. "I thought we could start with dinner and see where the conversation leads us." As they left together, Mom looked back at me with gratitude and something that might have been excitement. Watching her drive away with a man who clearly adored her, I felt Grandma's presence so strongly, it was almost like she was standing beside me. My phone rang, interrupting my thoughts. Richard's name appeared on the screen, and I hesitated before answering. We hadn't spoken since the will reading 3 days earlier. "Jade, it's Dad." His voice sounded different, smaller, more uncertain. "I wanted you to know that I started the counseling program today, and I met with the district attorney about plea arrangements for the embezzlement charges." I was surprised by his proactive approach. "How did it go?" "Hard," he admitted. "Harder than I expected. The counselor made me write down every lie I've told in the past year. The list was 14 pages long." The honesty in his voice was startling. The arrogant man from the law office had been replaced by someone who sounded genuinely remorseful. "I also wanted to apologize for putting you and your mother through all of this," he continued. "I know saying sorry doesn't fix anything, but I need you to know that I understand what I destroyed." "Dad." I said carefully, "Words are just words. Grandma gave you a chance to prove you can change. What matters now is what you do with it." "I know, and I'm going to do the work even if it takes years. I owe that much to your mother's memory and to the people I hurt." After we hung up, I walked through Mom's new house, imagining the life she could build here. The master bedroom had space for all her books. The kitchen was perfect for the dinner parties she used to love hosting, and the study could become her classroom preparation space once she finished her education degree. My own phone chimed with a text from the law school admissions office confirming my enrollment and class schedule. Constitutional law, criminal justice, family law. Subjects that would help me protect people the way Grandma had protected us. Around 10 o'clock, Mom returned home glowing with happiness. David had been every bit as wonderful as she'd remembered. Successful but humble, accomplished but kind. He'd spent the evening asking about her life, her dreams, her plans for the future. Most importantly, he'd listened to her answers with genuine interest and respect. "He wants to see me again," she said, settling beside me on the new sofa. "He asked if I'd like to go hiking next weekend. Apparently he remembers that I used to love trail walking." The fact that David remembered such specific details about her preferences after 25 years suggested that their college relationship had meant as much to him as it had to her. "What did you tell him?" "Yes, of course," Mom laughed. "Jade, I forgot what it felt like to have someone treat me like I'm interesting and valuable. He asked about my education plans, my career goals, even my opinion on current events. When was the last time your father asked me what I thought about anything?" The contrast was striking. While Richard had spent their marriage making Mom feel invisible and inadequate, David was genuinely curious about who she'd become and who she wanted to be. "There's something else," Mom said, pulling out a small wrapped package. "David brought this for you. He said Eleanor had asked him to give it to you when the time was right." Inside was a delicate silver locket that had belonged to Grandma's own grandmother. When I opened it, I found 2 tiny photographs, one of Grandma as a young woman and one of me at my high school graduation. The accompanying note was brief but profound. "Jade, this locket has been passed down through 4 generations of strong women. Now it belongs to you. Remember that real strength comes from protecting the people we love and standing up for what's right, even when it's difficult. You have everything you need inside you to change the world one family at a time." As I fastened the locket around my neck, I felt the weight of legacy and responsibility. Grandma had given me more than money for law school. She'd given me a mission and the tools to accomplish it. "There's one more thing we need to discuss," Mom said, growing serious. "I heard from Mr. Peterson today. Richard completed his first week of community service and counseling without any problems. The prosecutor is willing to accept a plea agreement that includes restitution and probation instead of prison time." I was surprised by my own reaction, relief. Despite everything Dad had done, I didn't want to see him in prison. I wanted to see him change. "More importantly," Mom continued, "Harold Stevens offered me a position managing the business side of Thompson Family Hardware. Apparently, Eleanor suggested I might be interested in learning business management while I finish my education degree. It was perfect. Meaningful work that would use Mom's organizational skills while providing flexible scheduling for her graduate program. Grandma had thought of everything. "Are you going to take it?" "I think so. It feels like the right way to honor Eleanor's memory while building something positive from all this chaos." As we sat together in Mom's beautiful new house, I realized that Grandma's plan had accomplished something remarkable. She'd taken a family destroyed by betrayal and selfishness and transformed it into something stronger and more purposeful than it had ever been before. 6 months later, I stood in the kitchen of Mom's house on Elm Street watching her prepare Sunday dinner for our expanded family. David had become a regular presence in our lives, and today we were also expecting his adult children, Sarah and Michael, who had welcomed Mom into their family with genuine warmth. The transformation in Mom was remarkable. Graduate school had rekindled her intellectual confidence, and managing the hardware store had given her a sense of professional accomplishment she'd never experienced. But most importantly, David's patient, respectful love had helped her rediscover the vibrant woman she'd been before years of emotional manipulation dimmed her light. "Jade, can you set the table for 7?" Mom asked, humming softly as she basted the roast. The kitchen smelled like rosemary and garlic, and classical music played softly from the radio on the windowsill. 7, I counted in my head. Mom, David, Sarah, Michael, you, me. Who's the 7th person? Mom's expression grew thoughtful. "I invited your father. He's been doing well in his program, and I thought it was time to see if we could have a civilized conversation." I was surprised, but not opposed to the idea. Richard had spent the past 6 months in intensive counseling, completed his community service hours without complaint, and made full restitution for the money he'd stolen. More importantly, he'd maintained his sobriety and seemed genuinely committed to understanding why he'd made such destructive choices. "How do you feel about seeing him?" I asked. "Curious mostly," Mom admitted. "I want to see if the change is real or if he's just performing for the counselors, and I want Sarah and Michael to meet him so they can understand our family history. David had been remarkably patient about Mom's need to process her relationship with Dad. Rather than trying to erase the past, he'd encouraged her to work through her feelings and find peace with what had happened. The doorbell rang and I went to answer it, finding Dad standing on the porch holding a small bouquet of daisies, Mom's second favorite flower after roses. He looked different than he had 6 months ago, thinner, older, but somehow more solid and present. "Hello, Jade," he said quietly. "Thank you for letting me come today." "Thank you for doing the work to deserve the invitation," I replied, taking the flowers. Dad followed me into the kitchen where Mom turned from the stove to greet him with polite courtesy. The awkwardness was palpable, but there was no hostility. Just two people trying to navigate a relationship that had been completely redefined. "Richard," Mom said, accepting the daisies with a neutral smile. "You look well." "I feel better than I have in years," he admitted. "The counseling has been enlightening. I understand now how badly I hurt you, and I don't expect forgiveness. I just wanted you to know that I take full responsibility for my choices." Before Mom could respond, David arrived with Sarah and Michael, bringing the energy of a family comfortable with each other. Introductions were made with grace and diplomacy, and soon we were all seated around the dining room table that Grandma had left to Mom. "This is beautiful," Sarah commented, admiring the antique oak table and matching chairs. "The craftsmanship is incredible." "It belonged to Richard's mother," Mom explained. "Eleanor had exquisite taste and a deep appreciation for things built to last." Dad's face softened at the mention of Grandma's name. "She always said this table had seen 4 generations of family dinners. I used to take that for granted." Michael, who worked as a therapist, asked thoughtful questions about Dad's recovery program. Rather than being defensive, Dad answered honestly about his gambling addiction, his pattern of lying, and the therapy techniques he was learning to manage his impulses. "The hardest part," Dad said, "was admitting that I'd become someone I didn't recognize. The man who hurt Carol and Jade wasn't the person my mother raised me to be." David listened carefully to these exchanges, not judging but clearly evaluating whether Dad posed any ongoing threat to Mom's well-being. His protective instincts were evident, but not possessive. "Eleanor sounds like she was a remarkable woman," David said. "Carol has told me so much about her wisdom and strength." "She was," Dad agreed, his voice thick with emotion. "And she saved our family by being strong enough to do what I couldn't do myself, face the truth and make the hard choices." As dinner progressed, I watched the careful dynamics around the table. Mom was cordial but distant with Dad, clearly comfortable in her new life but willing to acknowledge their shared history. Dad was respectful and genuine, asking about Mom's education and career without any hint of entitlement to her attention. Most importantly, David remained secure and supportive, never threatened by Mom's need to process her past relationship. His children followed his lead, treating everyone with kindness, while clearly understanding that their loyalties lay with their father and his happiness. "I have some news to share," Mom announced as we finished the main course. "I've been accepted to the doctoral program in educational administration. If I continue my studies, I could eventually become a school principal or superintendent." The pride in David's face was unmistakable. "That's wonderful, sweetheart. You'll be incredible in educational leadership." Dad's reaction was more complex, pride mixed with regret for the dreams he'd never supported during their marriage. "Congratulations, Carol. You always would have been a great teacher. I'm sorry I never encouraged you to pursue it." The acknowledgement seemed to lift something heavy from Mom's shoulders. She'd needed to hear him recognize what his selfishness had cost her professionally and personally. "There's something else," David said, reaching for Mom's hand. "I've been wondering if you'd like to make some changes to the house. Maybe expand the garden, add a home office for your studies." The domestic planning was clearly about more than renovations. David was asking Mom to envision a shared future to put down deeper roots with him. "I'd like that very much," Mom said, her smile radiant with contentment. As the afternoon wound down, Dad prepared to leave, thanking everyone for including him and promising to continue his recovery work. At the door, he paused to speak with me privately. "Jade, "I want you to know how proud I am of what you're accomplishing in law school," he said. "Your grandmother was right about your potential. You're going to help a lot of families avoid the mistakes I made." "Dad," I said carefully, "I hope you understand that rebuilding trust takes time, but I'm glad you're trying to become someone we can respect again." "I do understand, and I'm grateful for any chance to prove that I can be better." After he left, the rest of us gathered in the living room where Sarah played piano, while Michael and David discussed their shared interest in environmental conservation. Mom curled up beside David on the sofa, looking completely at peace. "This feels like family," she said quietly, and I realized she was right. Not the broken, dysfunctional family we'd been with Dad, but something healthier and more supportive. My phone buzzed with a text from my study partner at law school. We were working on a case involving financial elder abuse, and I felt Grandma's influence guiding my passion for protecting vulnerable people from exploitation. "I have something to ask all of you," I said, getting everyone's attention. "I want to start a foundation in Grandma's name focused on helping families dealing with financial abuse and manipulation. Would you help me plan it?" The enthusiasm around the room was immediate and heartfelt. David offered his veterinary practice as a potential counseling space for families with pets. Sarah, who worked in social services, had professional contacts who could provide resources. Michael knew therapists who specialized in family dynamics and addiction issues. Even Mom's work at the hardware store could contribute. She'd been developing relationships with other business owners who might support the foundation's mission. "Eleanor would be so proud," Mom said, tears gathering in her eyes. She always believed that protecting families was the most important work anyone could do. As the evening ended and our chosen family prepared to part ways, I felt the profound satisfaction that comes from turning pain into purpose. Grandma's final gift hadn't just been financial security or even the exposure of Dad's betrayals. Her greatest gift had been showing us that love sometimes requires difficult choices and that protecting the innocent is always worth the cost. Looking around the room at Mom's glowing happiness, David's steady devotion, and the warm acceptance of his children, I realized that Grandma had orchestrated something far more valuable than revenge. She'd created the possibility for healing growth and genuine love to flourish where manipulation and selfishness had once thrived. The locket around my neck felt warm against my skin, connecting me to generations of strong women who had faced adversity with wisdom and grace. I thought about the families I would help through my legal career and the foundation we were planning, and I felt Grandma's presence guiding every decision. Sometimes the greatest inheritance isn't money or property, but the wisdom to recognize our own worth and the courage to demand better from the people who claim to love us. Grandma's final wish had been to teach us that lesson, and in doing so, she'd given us everything we needed to build lives filled with genuine love, respect, and purpose. Have you ever had to make the difficult choice between enabling someone's destructive behavior and protecting the people they were hurting? Sometimes love requires us to set boundaries that feel harsh but are necessary for everyone's well-being. I'd love to hear your thoughts on family loyalty versus personal responsibility in the comments below. If this story resonated with you, please give it a like and subscribe to hear more tales of family resilience and justice. Share this with anyone who might need to remember that they deserve to be treated with respect and kindness, regardless of their family relationships. Thank you for listening to Grandma Eleanor's story and witnessing our journey from betrayal to healing. Remember that you have the strength to protect yourself and the people you love, even when it requires making choices that others might not understand. Stay strong, stay wise, and never let anyone convince you that you deserve less than genuine love and respect.